In 2008, I had an abortion, and I had a late term abortion. I think I was maybe 25 or even 26 weeks. I was 39 years old. I was in a terrible marriage with a abusive, horrible human being. I already had a daughter who father was a deadbeat, my first husband. And although I had felt compelled to get married, although I had felt like, oh, I'm doing my daughter a disservice by, not being married, by her not having, a father or a father figure in her life, I ended up marrying this loser jerk person who then, once I figured out they were a loser and a jerk, I was like, hey, we're breaking up. And next thing I know, like they were trying to force me to get pregnant. And it was a big old mess. I saw all of the signs, red flags or whatever you want to call it from the beginning. Um, there were so many things. Like we worked at the same job. And so I knew that, his background was clear because of the type of work that we both did. So I wasn't concerned about that. But what I didn't know was that he was such a big liar. Not only did he have um, three ex wives or two ex wives, and he told me he only had one. His second ex wife also had a kid, which he didn't tell me about. And then I found out that he owned all of these rental properties, all of these duplexes in Wilmington. And I remember like just being like this is really terrible. So that's number one. Number two, he was like doing all of this construction work and all this under the table work. So he was always, like giving me cash that I had to take to the bank. And I wasn't feeling that. It was like, all right, it was helping out or whatever. But then, like, he ended up manipulating me into buying my first house. It was a condo. Tried to get me to put his name on it, which I didn't. And then years later, at when we ended up breaking up and everything, literally caused me so much financial ruin and other things. Now, when I think about being married to this person and I think about all of the like bullshit and everything that went along with it, I never sat down to like unpack it, to heal from it, to like really ask myself, how did you even get involved with a person like this? Like, I never really did that work. And I didn't do that work because I thought it wasn't necessary. It was like, at least I didn't stay in a relationship a long time, blah, 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 and got rid of them. But I never and sat down and unpacked that trauma. Well, what I also know is that most black women, we don't sit down and unpack our trauma. Tammy and I were talking today, and we were talking about how when people have complex trauma, right, post traumatic stress disorder, complex PTSD, how like they tell they different traumas and they run them together like it's one thing. So like I was telling Tammy a story, and she was like, "Well, all that didn't happen in one day." Like, no, certain things used to happen, all the time. Like my mom used to not come and pick me up. She used to literally leave me at church and drop me off and not come pick me up. That would happen if I went to church 50 weeks a year. It would happen 44 weeks out of 50. Literally, because she just wouldn't come and get me. I would either have to figure out how to get home, after like everybody had left. So by like 1:30, 2 o'clock, the whole church is empty. Then, I would figure out how to get home. Somebody would ask me if I needed a ride. Sometimes I would walk. Sometimes I would take the bus. It was about a mile and 3/4, a city walking. So city walking, 2 miles take you half an hour as a kid. It take you 35 minutes, and it wasn't like nobody was checking for me. So, but I have right all of this trauma, like a lot of black women have, and our childhood trauma causes us to get into certain types of relationships when we get older. It causes us to date jerks and losers if we didn't have value in ourselves. And if our primary relationship, like our mother, if that relationship was shitty, then it's always going to question something in us. So, what I want to offer is three pieces of advice for black women when it comes to healing. The first and foremost is to recognize that it is your job, your first job, to heal. Your first job is self healing. And that you get to do personally, privately, professionally, but your first job is healing. The second thing is the things that your triggers will trip your trauma. That's the second thing. Triggers will trip your trauma. So whatever you don't heal through and learn and go through, you're going to constantly be triggered by things. And those triggers are going to trip your trauma. And you're going to remember things, and things are going to come up for you. And if you haven't processed any of it, who knows how you're going to respond and react, especially being part of such a violent and volatile society as we live in. And the third thing, there is help. And I offer support, especially for Black women who are ready to do the deep work of healing. That work involves a lot of self deconstruction, it involves a lot of self reflection, it involves a lot of ready, conversation that a lot of people may not be ready for. And I try to make it as easy for people as possible. And I do that by sharing my personal stories. I do that by sharing my healing. And I do that by focusing first and foremost on Black women's well being, my well being. And that is really centered around rest, reparations, and remunerations. And the thing that I want to help people with is empathy, evolution, and empowerment.